Awesome. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to give you a quick intro to the first thing you're going to do after you download it's called the GSAP library. The first thing that you're going to see in that library is going to be a lot of files. And it could be like a file overload. So I want to just do a quick overview of the main classes inside of the library. There's a few other classes that we're not going to talk about at all, which are such as the loader or some explicitly only green stock member, which are but the core library is the animation library, where you're going to find the Tween Nano, TweenLite, TweenMax, Timeline Lite, and Timeline Max. So what I want to do is just do a quick overview of what they are, what should you expect from them? Then I'll just make sure that everyone's with me if there's any questions on it, and then we'll start just animating until we run out of time. So the first thing is the Tween Nano, and the Tween Nano is the smallest library, and it's also the smallest in size. It's only 2 kilobytes, which is really small. It's not intended to be used. And by the way, TweenNano doesn't exist in JavaScript. So if you are a JavaScript animator or working with JavaScript, it doesn't exist in JavaScript. In general, the library is more or less 99% the same in ActionScript or JavaScript, which is one of the really cool benefits of using this library, because if you know how to animate in one language, you know how to animate in the other, as long as you know how to work with that specific language. In our lecture right now, we're going to be inside of Flash, but really, it's really small, minute well, I don't think that's even a word, between Flash and JavaScript. So TweenNano is the first difference, and TweenNano doesn't exist in JavaScript. It was created mainly for banner creators, where if any of you have worked in the banner industry, a lot of times there's really, really low kilobyte requirements from banners. They can't be more than 20 kilobytes, 30 kilobytes, sometimes 40 kilobytes. And animators slash programmers that are creating banners have to use the most lightweight that they could animation tool. And that's where TweenNano comes in. It's stripped down to the core minimum, which is needed to be able to create any animations. It's only 2K. And then it doesn't support a lot of features that this library has. So in many ways, this isn't really part of the library. It's in the library, but it's really kind of like a standalone minimized version of the library. Contrary to all the rest. All the rest is kind of interdependent on each other, and each one is a layer higher in control than the one before. The TweenNano, although it has less features than the TweenLite, it doesn't do a few critical things that TweenLite could do. So in general, if you're creating animations and you're not very concerned about size, when we're talking about not very, then TweenLite all together is about 4.7 kilobytes more. So you're talking about at 6.7 kilobytes. If you get a forward 6.7 kilobytes added into your project, so just start off on the TweenLite. If you're very concerned about file size, then you are not going to be able to use all the features that exist inside of the library. You're only going to be able to use the basic animation features that we're going to look at very, very shortly. Okay, so that's TweenNano. Only exists in ActionScript, doesn't exist in JavaScript. When you move down to the TweenLite, that's the first tool that's actually part of the whole package of the whole library, where the main features of it has more sophisticated controls for interactiveness, which basically enables you to create better interactive animations than you could with the TweenNano with less code. And it also adds more functions to it, and it also adds more capability, which is in the GreenSock world is called plugins, which enables you to add features and capabilities that aren't inside the TweenLite in default. So for example, if you want to tint something, you wouldn't be able to do that built in with TweenNano, but you could do it with TweenLite by adding a plugin that does tints. Now, the difference between TweenLite and TweenMax is similar as well. It's just a much bigger library. It preloads a lot of plugins, so such as tinting and a lot of other things. So automatically, the TweenMax loads up a lot more things than the TweenLite, and it comes with a few more features such as repeat and yo-yo and things of the nature that just make it a lot easier for even more interactiveness. And another layer of capability of listening to built-in ActionScript events or JavaScript events, while TweenLite doesn't work with the event model, it works with a callback model. We're going to see that throughout the next hour. We're going to be working with callbacks. But if you're really into really hard typing and things of that nature, then you would probably want to work with TweenMax. Now, TweenLite is even cooler. It's basically a wrapper for TweenLite or TweenMax. It enables you to basically create a timeline and put your tweens inside of that timeline. Instead of creating threading animations on your own, you're basically threading them inside of the inside of the timeline light. What that does, it enables you to pause everything, to play it back, to change the speed of your animations, to even play backwards, to reverse, to yo-yo it, like we were talking about earlier. Well, not yo-yo, the actual function yo-yo only exists in the max line, but the idea is similar. So it's basically, it basically enables you to control all your animations in a kind of a more, I'm talking to all the animations at the same time. It's really cool. I don't think it's even possible to do without a lot of code, without the timeline light. So it really cuts a lot of your work if you are planning on creating any animation that is going to be repeating itself in different intervals, or if it's going to be going backwards and forwards and stuff of that nature. Now, the Timeline Max is on the same idea like the TweenLite and TweenMax, just adds more control and more capability like the yo-yo and other stuff of that nature. But really, that's one of those stuff that you want to just like get yourself familiar with. There's quite a few extra functions that are added inside of the Timeline Max. We're not going to get to that in this hour. We're not going to get into the Timeline Lite or Max at all in this hour, but what you're learning now is going to give you the motivation to look into the Timeline Lite or Max as well. They're very similar. They work in the same type of kind of thought process. And just last words about that, the TweenMax and the Timeline Max are both capable of interacting with the built-in Flash events. So they dispatch Flash events if you're working in ActionScript, and also in JavaScript, the JavaScript events. So it's really, this is bigger files, but give you more control and more kind of programming kind of style, less to think. You just have access to everything. So that's it. That was the intro to all the different types of the core libraries that you're going to find in the GSAP library bundle. I'm going to give the stage just for a quick make sure that everyone's cool, and if there's any questions, and then we'll start animating. Well, the table of the features, to be honest, like even if you just go into greensock.com/asdocs, you're going to get like a breakdown of the big differences between them. But really, once you start animating, and I would just start from the lowest library, and then you'll see that you're missing features, and you're going to go deeper and deeper into them. The differences between them are not very big. So when you're looking at the difference between TweenLite and TweenMax, TweenLite just doesn't come with anything pre-loaded. So if, for example, it's like any plugin. So when you go into their documentation, there's like maybe 50 different plugins. If it's sound plugins and tint plugins and physics plugins and motion blur plugins and all these and all the different built-in plugins in general that are inside of Flash, they're just not there by default. And then when you go in and actually go to the TweenMax by default preloads almost, not all of them, but it preloads quite a lot of them, so you don't have to actually load them up. So it's really just a matter of file control. Once you know how to use the TweenLite library and you learn how to add plugins, then you could just switch around and decide, are you going to use the TweenLite or the TweenMax? If you're using more than X amount of plugins, which I don't know by heart which one it is, then it doesn't make sense even to use the TweenLite, because then you would just want to use TweenMax, because it also comes with a few extra functions, and those extra functions we talked about are kind of just like making your life easier. We're talking about three things. One is dispatching. It dispatches ActionScript 3 events. There's for example, pause, your capability of pausing all the different properties, your capability of repeating, your capability of creating a yo-yo effect. But it's really just like extra buzz more than like the core essentials that are just needed. It definitely does mean for file size. So let me see. Let me just go question by question here. You know what? It does. You know, David is asking. Let me just see if there's any other question before that. Okay, so David is asking, the question is that does it matter with higher bandwidth these days in context of Flash? I could understand for JS. Well, you know what it is? If you worked ever in advertising, And it's not true also, by the way. I think like you always should be concerned about file sizes. I know that 2K or 7K is not a big deal, but if you're loading up TweenMax and you're adding all the capabilities that it has, it could go up to 40. I'm not sure exactly the amount, but you're talking about like 400 or 500 times bigger if you're loading everything up when you don't need it. Now, 40K might not seem like a lot, but if you have a server and your server has, let's say, 10,000 users, and all those 10,000 users a day are downloading an extra 40K that they don't need to, then you're creating a lag on your server, aka you're creating or a slower experience for your users, or you're creating a bigger cost for your server. It might not be that important to the speed of the user one-to-one with your server, but your server has to send that communications. So the smaller your files are, it's always better. So you always want to go for the least that you could. And exactly, Pavel. Nano is mainly for banners. You know, like unless you know for sure that you're creating a really simple application and you're only going to be using a fade in or something really simple, then you probably go for the Nano. But in general, Nano solves the problem of banners. And really, I personally prefer just always using the TweenLite unless you have to use the TweenMax, because the TweenMax will automatically load up a lot of stuff that you might not actually need. Okay, so next question. Um, So yeah, I think that answered that question, right, David? Perfect. Awesome. So let's start animating. Let's get our feet wet. Yeah, they overlap each other in many ways, but these are really important questions because when I'm a big believer in, if you could slice your project in 1020K, then do it. Obviously, if it doesn't make you work more. So it's really just finding that compromise between keeping your files small and um, saving you a lot of time. And this is what this library does and does it really well. So if you work with your TweenLite and Timeline Light, then you're automatically saving a lot. I don't think there's a big difference between 2K and maybe 6K, but there is a big difference between TweenLite and TweenMax. But in general, I would say if you're more comfortable in the coding, I would say just learn how to activate plugins. It's not a big deal. Let's just get started. You'll see how easy it is once we get started.